Well, good evening, everyone. I know there's probably going to be a few more people trickling in at this point, but I did want to make sure that I got us started on time so we can get out of here on time. And those of you that haven't had dinner yet can go have your dinner, and I can finish my pork fried rice that I had 3 bites of after this. So good evening to you all. Just really good to have you here. And we've got some folks that are with us in the Zoom world. We'll be recording this. So if you wanted to watch it again and again over dinner, you certainly can do that. Well, if you missed anything, or if anybody wasn't able to be here tonight, the recording will be there for those purposes. But again, thank you so much for joining us. I've got some notes here, so I'm going to continue to kind of take peeks at my notes, make sure that I'm not missing anything that I want to talk about today. But since we know that there's just a ton of information that is in your inbox these days. There's a lot to keep track of for the first weeks of school, lots of emails, lots of for the students assigned homework. Hopefully there's not too much going that's due for tomorrow morning. And thank you to all the students for being here. I know it's a long day for you as well. I know we've also got back to school night this week, so a lot happening. So again, we're really happy to have you here and have most of you here in person, because we want to be able to set the tone for the course of the year. I think this is an opportunity for us to do a little bit of a reset. I want to share a little bit of what the students had to experience during our reboot camp. So recount a little bit of that for you and just kind of run through a little bit of the kind of big topics. And then my colleagues will take over and we'll go through a lot of the logistics. So tonight's agenda, or actually before I do that, I want to make those introductions. It's good that I picked up the agenda because that's a good reminder to do introductions. You saw Mary Dunn outside. The place would not run without Mary Dunn. Mary actually is the one that sends most of your documents directly to the schools. So when students are applying, she's the one at the helm of SCORE, pressing send on all of those buttons, uploading things. Mary is available anytime you've got questions for things, and she can always come and ask us if things are specific. But I think you'll hear again and again tonight that we're always open to questions that you might have, or meetings that you might want to do. And of course, my two other colleagues, Joelle Chen and Louis Almonte, you'll be hearing from both of them tonight as well. So this is tonight's agenda. Introductions, check, we've done that. Oh, and I'm Carolyn Middleton, Director of College Counseling. You've seen my name in your inbox millions of times. So even if we don't work directly together, I feel like I work with all of you. Some of what we want to talk about is the complexity of the process, but ways to make it simple. Because it's never completely simple, but there's ways to manage that complexity. And then there's three important themes that I want to talk about right at the beginning of this talk before we jump into those logistics that I mentioned. After that, it'll be the logistics timelines, some details about deadlines, a little bit more about the admissions and financial aid resources that we have available, including the people resources, but also the resources online. We will talk a little bit about after submitting the application. That's the part that not everybody is ready for, but I think it's important to know that once those applications are submitted, there's still some things for students to do and important things for you to keep track of overall. And then, of course, we try and leave some time at the end for questions. So sometimes folks want to ask questions that are for the whole group. We might even have some folks that are asking questions in the Zoom. So Ms. Chen is ready to and poised to answer those. And sometimes there's questions that you want to ask after, or you want to percolate on things a little bit and set up an appointment. We're open to all of that, certainly. But again, in the interest of time, I'll start with my first real slide. If you remember last year, I started with a little cartoon that we borrowed again from the New Yorker. I really like this one for this year because things can look very, very complex. Oh, if it were only so simple. I love the cartoon because it just describes this stage of the process. There's so many metrics to consider, but it's both a little complex and overwhelming, but honestly, making sense of college policies can be complex. It's not you, it's them. It's the making sense of those. Sometimes you need someone to help you walk through those processes. And to be honest with you, sometimes things are complex for us as well. So we have to dig a little bit further. We have to talk to our colleagues on the college side, which I feel at some points of the year we're constantly doing to check and double check, or they change their policy. And so we never want to remember just rely on our memories of things. Sometimes you'll see us say, while you're here, let's just double check that and look at the college's website just to make sure. So there's complexity, but those of you that have had a student go through this process before, you can attest the fact that once you have a list of colleges and you're focused, you use your resources correctly, the process can go very smoothly. We were just talking to TLT, where are you? We were just talking to TLT about her daughter, Sarah, who's off in college now, and thinking about her process a couple of years ago and how smoothly it felt like it went. When you're in the midst of it, it doesn't always feel that way, but we're here to make it feel that way. We're here to, students come into my office all the time and say, before I came here, I felt really stressed. Then I came in and I talked to you and you somehow just absorbed all that stress. It's not magic. We don't have any magic kind of pills for that, but we are able to kind of make sense of things and sometimes make them a little bit more simple than they feel like they are at this stage of the process. I wanted to talk a little bit about the case study program that we did during Reboot Camp, and some parents and guardians may have heard about it. This was the programming that we did right before the first day of school. So I wanted to fill you in a little bit on it. The seniors worked with 5 experienced admission officers, folks who come to us typically every year. Some of them have been visiting us for, I think we've done this program for 7 or 8 years. I've been here 9, so I think we started it the year after I started. So we had folks from representative from Sarah Lawrence, from Barnard College, from Connecticut College, from Lehigh University, and from Binghamton. Part of the reason why we selected them is they're relatively close, so we can get them to come here and get here on time and in person, but we also know that they know how this process works. So what they helped students do was analyze 3 fictitious applications to a fictitious college. The name of the college is Good College, because everybody wants to go to a good college. But the description of that college, the profile of it was really an amalgamation of many different characteristics of schools. And I think the students can attest that each of those 3 applications had so many different kinds of identities and complexities that the conversations that came from those cases was really an opportunity for students to think not just about themselves in the process, but think about who's reading their application and the care that it takes to read those applications. So those multiple identities and backgrounds and stories and contexts and experiences hopefully came through in these fake applications. I will say to all of the seniors, your applications will always look better than those that we have created as fictitious applications. We read all the letters that actually come in from your teachers. Your teachers write great letters of recommendation. Often they come and they consult with us because they're worried, am I writing a good enough letter? This is intimidating because this student is so great. And we give them a lot of guidance on doing that, but they take great care in doing that themselves. So students started by examining institutional priorities that Good College had kind of set forth in their school profile. So the things that Good College thought were really important or had indicated that was happening on their campus this year. And then the students had the opportunity to sit together, read the applications, present their findings to their peers, much like I did, Lewis did, Joelle did when we did college admissions. We presented each application to a small committee or to a large committee. And so showing them what that experience was like, I think was really important. They then got to make a decision for which of the 3 applications to admit to Good College, and then whether to waitlist or deny the other 2. And not surprisingly, the outcomes of those 5 committees was quite varied. Some feeling really strongly about one over another, some battles going on as we did our panel, but discussions were really deep. And I think hopefully what the students saw is there's a person on the other side of this process. We wanted to humanize this process. Certainly there's metrics and rigor that colleges are looking for, but they're reviewing an application. It's a human reviewing a human application. AI has not made its way too much into our process. And then to recognize, when we talked about those institutional priorities, I think it's important for students to recognize that there's some stuff that's going to be out of your control. One year a college might be looking for classics majors. They might need a tuba player. They might need point guards. They might have over-enrolled their applicants, over-enrolled their first year class last year. Maybe they built a new dorm and they're expanding the class, or their applications went up 50%. There was one year when we were doing this during COVID, where the applications went up so high. There was one college that reported a 102% increase in applications. Yeah, the application process for that school changed quite a bit that year. And so we kind of have to be ready in some ways to roll with the punches. But the important messaging is there are things that you can control and there are things that you can't control. You can't control some of those parts of the process, but you can control what is being sent to the colleges on your behalf. You've had control over your transcript, especially what you're doing this year and the courses that you selected. You had control over the teachers who you chose to write your letters of recommendation. Those essays and supplements that you're writing right now, you have control over that, not necessarily over the questions that they ask, but certainly what you use in your responses and how you write those responses. So you realize also that this is a somewhat simplistic assessment. It's not reality. As we emphasize to the students, it's never going to be the case where there's only 3 applicants and one college. I tried to make it clear that those 3 applicants probably had many of the other 2,400 colleges across the US or even those outside of the US as part of their college list. There's not just 3 applicants, there's more than that. And certainly college classes are a lot bigger than that. So it was not real in some ways, but it's important to understand that most institutions do have these priorities that we can't predict, but we also can't become them. You can't shape yourself into this square if you've got a circle. I don't know if that was the right reference, but made sense in my head. At the same time, I think what I really want to emphasize here is that there's opportunities that lay before us. There's many things, like I said, that we can control, the effort and successes that we can put forth, and then the practical steps that we can take to compel these positive outcomes. And we're going to spend a lot of time tonight talking about more of those practical steps overall. So one of those 3 themes that I mentioned is about pacing yourself. I had this conversation with a couple of students today who wanted to do everything all at once. Sometimes students will put down all of those essays and all that information into one document, and they start working on their regular decision, working on their early decision, working on their early action, and kind of doing them all at the same time. Some of those essays may end up being similar to one another, but it's important to prioritize, to start with those that have earlier deadlines, maybe working on early decision and early action at the same time, so you end up in a good place. And then what you'll find is we strongly recommend that when you submit an application on, say, November 1 or October 30th or October 31st for that November 1 deadline, you give yourself a day break and then you continue to pace through those other applications so that when you hear back from that school, that response from that early decision school or an early action school that responds to you mid-December, you don't end up then having to try and rush through everything. You've spent that month in between going through and systematically making responses to those supplemental questions. The supplements get easier as you write them. You know more about what to look for, where to look for it. I promise that is true. It does become easier to write. And for those of you that are kind of struggling through some of those supplements, once we get our hands on them, meaning to help you and making suggestions, we can even suggest where you look to find some answers or find some details about those colleges, making sure that it's specific and it's personalized and that you're showing that you've done your research and know something about those schools. We'll make every effort to make sure that you're making those essays personal to you overall. So again, one factor you're going to be able to control is your organization. We'll talk a little bit more about organizational specifics, but just some examples. We created a format for your activities in Word way back last year. I think it was April when we made an assignment. It was due May 16th, and many of you completed that activities list when we asked you to, and some completed them over the summer. No judgment there. What we wanted to do is to be able to give you ample feedback. 160 characters or 150 characters, excuse me, does not give you a lot of room to provide a lot of detail. So we try and artfully make sure that you're including things that are going to make the colleges understand your impact, your involvement, and even your sort of lateral impact, how you may have mentored others and worked with others. Co-leadership, I was saying this to someone today, co-leadership means you had to manage things alongside someone else. That actually sometimes is more difficult than being just a single leader. So hopefully helping you to craft those descriptions so they really aptly capture what it is you've actually done as part of that activity. We recommend creating a Word document where your senior can add tabs for the personal statement. And many of you have done that and have already listed those schools for the supplemental essays and those other documents. Keeping it again in one place so that it's easy to manage also allows you to see what's happening one school to the other and if there are similarities between the two. Again, prioritizing those earlier dates is really important. But as you go, you might look back and say, oh, I wrote that why blank college essay for another school. Let me think about the reasons why that school stood out to me. So the me part is going to be the same. And then there might be things that you change up for another school, similar kind of essay, right? Later on when you're writing for, say, regular decision or a later deadline. Similar kind of thing with auditions and portfolios required. I know some of you that adds a level of complexity to your application, but it's really about organization. It's about making sure you have the details together in one place so that you can systematically go through and add some check boxes, on the common application, or at least I feel when you fill out those pieces of the common application, they give you that green check mark. There's satisfaction that comes along with that. So systematically going through supplemental information, audition, portfolio requirements, all of those things. All of this falls under the category of pacing yourself by breaking things down into smaller pieces overall. When the common application launched on August 1, a senior official for the organization said, applying to college is not a race, even though it may feel like one. Just like each college has its own deadline, each student has their own timeline. So take the time you need to be thoughtful and seek the resources and support you need to help you find a college where you will thrive. All this before the deadline, but important stuff, important advice to think about. These people have been on the helm of the College Board for a long time. I think it's been around for 50 years now. Is that right? 50 years? I think it went online when I was, my first job as a college counselor is when it started to be online. It used to be a paper document that you would photocopy and you would send out to all of the schools. But these folks know what kind of energy you put into completing these applications. The online portion of it made it easier, but all the online information does have the effect of making sometimes things feel a little bit overwhelming. Many of us like to say that we do our best work under the pressure of deadlines. And if you learned one thing from writing, say, your AmStud papers last year, or maybe any of your English or history classes, this is almost never true. There's a little bit of pressure that's good. There's a little bit of that looming deadline that's helpful, so that, you pressure yourself to do things. But really breaking it up into pieces is going to be much more helpful. You'll be much more thorough. And your helpers, college counselors, the folks that you rely on, even talking to your parents about ideas and brainstorming ideas. It's going to make sense if you do all of this with a thought to, I want this to be thorough. I want it to go through several drafts. I want to be thoughtful about what I'm doing. So not waiting to the deadline. And we try not to allow you to do that hard because you don't get grades from us. So we're not like pressuring you with grades or hanging things over your head like that. But a deadline is a deadline when it comes to college. So we do want to make sure that you have everything that you're doing, but not be thinking about sending something in the night before. The reality is by breaking the bigger projects into smaller parts, we can be more thorough. We can be more thoughtful. We can produce better final work products. And again, it's the same with the college process. Take it one step at a time, make it less overwhelming and more actionable. So thinking about things that way. So we're going to spend some time tonight talking about resources and support, as well as organizational tips to help scaffold your application process and present your best help. That scaffolding idea, that also is something that you may have heard from your AmStud teachers who like to scaffold your writing. And it works. I mean, I think many of you would say, come out with better final products when you scaffold things. I also want to talk a little bit about communication, because we also think this is a really important factor and a really important kind of theme to think about in the college process. There's a lesson in this. Colleges are going to be reaching out to you to let you know that they're visiting here. You see those notifications through SCORE coming in if you're following any schools in that tool, in that system. And we've had our first representatives come and visit this week. On Monday, we saw 6 people coming at the same time from Canadian schools. We had 3 other people coming from 3 different London schools. We had University of Michigan was here. I think there were 2 others that were just on Monday. So a lot of representatives that are coming in September and October. And we've talked a little bit with the students about what you need to do to ask permission to visit with those schools. But those meetings are really great, even for schools that don't count demonstrated interest. It's a way to be face to face with the person that reads your application. It's a way to be face to face with a person who can answer your questions. So sometimes it's a one-on-one conversation. Sometimes it's 6 people in the group or 10 people. Either way, these are going to be important meetings if you can make them. If you can't miss class, and some teachers say, no, you can't miss the class, it's important today, you can go for those first 5 minutes. Take them up on that offer. If you've got an exam in a class and you can't do either of those things, let your college counselor know, because we will make sure that we express your interest, fill out any forms they ask you to fill out, and also gather materials if that's helpful. For students that are applying to the talent-based programs, like those programs where auditions and portfolios are required, or students who are applying for financial aid, which may require more documents after you submit your application. And for students that are hoping to be recruited for athletic programs, it's really important that you're on top of the details. So those situations add kind of another layer of things. But again, it's about communicating. It's making sure that you check your emails, especially if there's one coming from your college counselor, and also making sure that communication works at home. I think parents and guardians always want to be helpful and supportive. I've heard families talking about, well, we don't even talk the college word in our home because everybody tightens up and nobody wants to talk about it. Others talk freely about it or approach it lightly, waiting for the student to talk. I think you can gauge what the communication is like at home, but it's going to be important to set those parameters for both students and for parents and guardians. We talked about this last year. Sometimes it's Tuesday night is college night. We're going to talk about that. That's going to be part of that conversation. Or, I sometimes have parents who say, they're not telling me anything. Can you give me the lowdown on what's happening? And usually once the students, once you guys get into our offices, you're talking more freely about what it is you're experiencing, your questions, your hopes, your aspirations, your ideas. And we like to help triangulate that conversation, but we also encourage open communication. Your parents and guardians are folks that are going to be with you for the rest of your lives. So you want to make sure that you're keeping those communication lines open and that you have those conversations with them as well. So I always encourage that kind of healthy communication at home, backing off when you sense it feels like it's too much of an overwhelming conversation. Your students, and students, your family members. Making sure that communication is open is really helpful. Keep them in the loop. I find that for me, when I think about getting to a successful finish line, and this is even true, writing my letters of recommendation, helping you all, editing essays. I know that I owe some of you a few edits on things because you've submitted your things for me, and preparing for tonight, preparing for the first day of school when you did that case studies. So I might be behind on some things, but for me also, I know that there's things that I control. I need to apply my own organization. I need to be able to say, hey, you let me know when you're ready for those edits. Let me know, when I've submitted edits, if you've got a question about what I'm suggesting, or you want to reject an edit, that's totally fine. It's your writing, it's your voice, it's your authenticity that's going to be the most helpful. But again, if I'm true to myself, I think about what I'm doing. Am I doing it for the right reasons? Am I being realistic about outcomes? What am I hoping to achieve? Can I really write 5 letters in a day? Like really thinking about the details of what I need to make sure I'm thinking about. Same applies to you all. Balancing things on the college side with what you're doing for class. It's important for you as students to think about that. Four things that are going to bring success. So this is kind of still under the heading of communication, but four things that I always think about. One is that engagement, that communication piece, and some of the specifics of that. We need for students to be on board and on our calendars. If you haven't set up your first appointment of the year with us, please do that. And please continue to do that. Like it's okay for you to meet with us once every week, once every other week, or to communicate that first time when we have that first appointment, but then maybe we do edits offline. Maybe it's something that we're communicating with in the documents. That's fine too. And we'll request those individual in-person meetings when we need them. Seniors should be scheduling fairly regular meetings, like I said, but this is true of families too. Sometimes people will come up after this meeting and say, is it okay if we schedule a family meeting? We had one with you last spring. Is it okay for us to do that again? Absolutely. And we'll give some parameters for timing on that too. The second thing that leads to success is partnership. I think I've tried to explain this in what I've already just said, but we think of this counseling relationship as a partnership with students, and students are in the primary driver's seat, if you will, but it's also a family partnership. Students, we can't apply to college for you. No, but neither can or should your parents or guardians. We will assist you in crafting a great application, the best you can possibly do, and we'll provide our advice, and we'll give you as many statistics as we can. There's no crystal ball in this. We do have some data. It's not completely scientific, and we don't have the exact data. Doesn't provide us a lot of detail about, if you're looking at GPAs and test scores, that doesn't provide a lot of detail about the content, the rigor of your curriculum, et cetera. But we're always happy to walk through scattergrams, walk through data with you to make sure that we're giving you the right information. Keeping an open mind is also something that's really important. And I, again, keep this under the heading of communication. We ask for you to submit a final college list and, a final almost there college list at the end of October. And again, we'll go through some of these dates with you. What we want you to do in that list is to really give careful consideration to the options you've selected. Do you have all schools that admit less than 5% of applicants? Are all the places that you've listed be places, will they all be places you'd be happy to attend? Even the foundation colleges. You want to make sure that that whole list is pretty consistent in that way, and they would all be places where you'd want to go. Could you see yourself as a student in their classrooms? Have you done the research? Some students are saying, well, writing this supplemental essay feels really hard at this point because I don't know enough about the school yet. Well, that's kind of the purpose of the supplement. Get to know that school. And like I said, those kinds of essays are going to become a lot easier as you go. In terms of patience, that's the last of the four things that I think are going to bring success. Patience, I ask you all to have patience with yourselves. That's an important thing. Patience with yourselves and with each other, rather than getting frustrated with your teen or with your parent. Like goes both directions, or frustrated with us. Definitely reach out to us, help you. As we want to make sure that this process is going to go as smoothly as it can. And have that patience with yourself, because the reality is there's a lot going on in the world right now. So that's always kind of seeping into each of our heads and our thoughts. So this is a way to streamline your focus on things. And then a little bit more, and one more slide that I'm going to go through. But before I get to that, a little bit about the support that we provide. We've got a class of 84 students. We've got 3 full-time college counselors. We have a full-time operations manager. We're among the most well-resourced college offices in the country. You won't find a lot that have fewer on their caseload. So we just do college counseling. That's our jobs. We also do advising, and we do other things in the life of the school, but our focus is really on you. And that's what we're doing at this time of the year. I had an inquiry from a junior parent that wanted to meet the very first week of school. So not even this week, but last week. I want to talk to you about the year ahead. And I said, my seniors haven't even had a chance to come in and talk. So we really want you to be our primary focus at this time of the year. We sometimes will have parents that say, do I need to hire a consultant to apply to college? We don't think that you do, but we realize that there might be some families who hire someone to assist on essay writing, working, on a tutor that has said, I do SAT tutoring, but I also do essay tutoring. Whomever you work with, we also want to make sure that we provide that kind of input. So sometimes when families hire an outside consultant to advise on the list or the application or the research, we see the following: a student comes to their school counselor less frequently. I've met with this other counselor, so I may not need to meet with you. We're the ones who write your letters. We need to know what's going on in your process. We also know that we know our school. We know like how things work for Berkeley Carroll applicants, and folks from outside don't have the same kind of access to that data. So sometimes when a family hires an outside consultant, that makes it a little bit difficult for us to guide a student to the best of our ability. So just keep that in mind. Again, that's also under the heading of communication and communicating clearly with us. It also is sometimes a challenge when students have advice from two sources. Trying to parse through that can be a little bit challenging. The last kind of overarching big picture thoughts that I have are about how each applicant, each student, we think about them as apples and oranges. So you might have a college list that's very different from your friends. You might have something that overlaps a little bit with your friends, but each one of you, based upon your academic profile, your interests, your criteria, you're different. You're like apples and oranges. It's important for you to know that so much of our advice is really individualized for that reason. We can't give one general answer about interviewing because not every school does it. Some interview before you submit the application, some interview after you submit the application. Some do a video interview instead. Most of them do virtual interviews. So always these responses are, it depends. So sometimes the more direct answers are the ones that are the most appropriate. How much will finances play a role in the admissions decisions? Am I a competitive applicant to the school? We never know exactly what the decision-making process is on the college side. We have some predictions because we have experience in doing that. But it's important to recognize that every process is going to be a little bit different from person to person. And all of those answers might be a little bit different from person to person. So know that we also discourage students from asking each other about their test scores or GPAs. We talked a little bit with students during our first meeting with them before the case studies, how sometimes it's good to keep your cards close. It allows you to be able to maintain your sense of privacy. Doesn't mean we want everything to be secret from one another. You probably have some friends that you talk to about your college list, but it doesn't have to be something that you blast out there, nor should people be asking one another direct questions about, are you applying early decision here? Are you applying early decision here? Are you, it becomes a very contentious conversation if that's the way it's going. So I know a lot of your conversations, students start with the college talk. Give yourself a break with that sometimes, and don't have every conversation be about the college talk. Be seniors, be involved in the life of your school, do your day-to-day work, because that's really important for the college stuff, but it's also really important for you. So that's some of the advice on that side of things. And I think I've blown through some of my bigger topics that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Almonte, who's going to talk a little bit about the calendar highlights on the road ahead. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So I am going to talk about logistics. So as you can see, this is the next 4 months that you all have ahead of you. And this is the dream schedule with deadlines, the things that you all need to do that will keep you on track, that will alleviate anxiety and result in a very successful, not so stressful process, with fingers crossed with lots of success at the end of this. So with focusing in September, so September 4th, that was the day of reboot camp, I believe. What was due that day was a first draft of your college essay, as well as your activities, which was due in May of last year, but we understand some things happen. If you have not drafted that yet, I would say it's really important that you prioritize that, because your college essay is the essay that's seen by every college and university that you apply to. It's the main part of your application where your voice is amplified in your application. So it's really important that you have a draft of that you can start working with your counselor with. I would say if you don't have it done and you can get it done in the next week or two, you would still be in a good place that your counselor can review it. You can start shaping and molding it. Or if you have picked the wrong or an ineffective topic and you're kind of workshopping that with your counselor, we can reroute you and still have you be able to crank out another topic and another essay and still be able to get things done in a timely manner where we're mitigating stress. If you wait until October to do this, everything is going to hit you like a truck, and it's not a good feeling. So we want to make sure that you all prioritize this as soon as possible. The second thing that's really important in the month of September is narrowing down and balancing your college list. If you do not have a college list, you can't move on with the next steps in your process, right? So you can't determine if you need to demonstrate interest or visit the college. If you don't know what college you're applying to, you don't know what supplements you have to write. If you don't know what college you're applying to, you don't know if they have an interview or not, and if you need to complete the interview. So if right now you have less than, I would say, like 3 schools. If you have 3 schools or less, you probably need more at this point. I would say ideally, roughly around this time, most students are entertaining the idea of applying to around 6 or more schools. If that is not you, then you need to do a lot more research and start kind of fleshing out that list a bit more, knowing that it's going to be finalized in November. But ideally, you want to have the gist of the idea in terms of what your list is shaping out to be. Once you have that list, or you know that there's schools that are in motion, you can research the school, you can start scheduling interviews, you can start figuring out if you're applying for an artistic program, what's required for their portfolio or the auditions. But again, you can't move forward with that if you don't have the list and you don't know what schools you're applying to. For interviews, like Ms. Middleton mentioned, there are some colleges that you can you could have started interviewing as early as this past summer, or throughout the upcoming months prior to their deadline. And then there's some schools that after you apply, they will contact you for an interview or you can request the interview. But once you have that finalized or semi-finalized college list, you can figure that out. Ms. Middleton also mentioned this, but as of right now, I believe we have close to 100 schools that are signed up to visit Berkeley Carroll in person. And it's an opportunity for all of you to make contact with them. So you can learn about the school if you've never visited them. If you've already visited them and you want to continue demonstrating interest, it's an opportunity for you to sit there and connect with the rep, get those bonus points for demonstrated interest. Or just in general, if you have more questions, it's an opportunity for you to sit down with the person who's more than likely going to read your application. And then you can, build rapport with them, ask some questions, and get everything done in one shot. We all gave you a copy of your transcript that needs to be signed and returned to our office by September 17th. This is important for you and your parent or guardian to review and sign together to make sure that the name of the class is right, that the grade in the class is right, that the credits are right. So that way we're sending an accurate representation of your transcripts, and then you are giving us permission and authorization to send that personal document to colleges and universities. Without that signature and without your stamp of approval, we can't legally send that type of stuff because it breaks different policies. So that's all September. September is a really great opportunity for you to get ahead of things because classes are going to ramp up by October, and October is probably the most stressful month for our students in this process. So I would recommend, if you have a solid college list and you already have a draft of your essay, you want to start moving forward with drafting some of your supplements, prioritizing your possible early decision schools and your early action schools. In October, things kind of shift, and this is probably the busiest month. So for families that are applying for financial aid, the FAFSA and the CSS profile go live as of October 1st. So if you're applying for early decision or early action, you have a 1-month turnaround to get those financial documents completed and submitted to the schools. So for families that are on financial aid, if you need a bit more guidance, if you need some support, if you have a complicated situation in terms of finances or family dynamic, we have a consultant that we work with who runs all of our financial aid workshops. His name is Paul Martin. He's part of College Money Method. So we can always connect you with him. And then just in general, if families want to connect, if you're not on financial aid but still want to connect with our consultant, we can always loop you both together. And then for a fee that he charges, you can always lean on his expertise. In terms of October is really important to consult with your counselor, because I would say by mid-October at the latest, ideally you should know if you're going to apply early decision. And then looking at your current college list in October, if you have schools that offer early action, all of us are going to say to prioritize that early action deadline, because early action is going to give you like 1 bonus point on your application. And then early decision is going to give you like 5 bonus points on your application. Consulting with your counselor about ED is important, because there's some EDs that in terms of data have some trends that like it could possibly happen. And then there's some where it's going to be very unlikely and very difficult, and really kind of strategizing to figure out, like, do you want to take this shot? if you take this shot, we need to figure out a plan that if it does work out, great, but if it doesn't, then we need some other things in motion that you feel confident that you're gonna have options that you're happy with at the end of this process. Due October 1st or earlier. Ideally, you should be drafting your early decision and early action supplements for your counselors to start reviewing so that we can finalize them in the month of October so that they can be ready to go by November 1st. You want to continue with portfolio auditions and interview planning. So I would say a good kind of deadline for most colleges is like if you have a portfolio, ideally you want to have that done by like first 2 weeks of October. Because sometimes there's a bit of a wiggle room that you need when you're applying for an artistic program, and then you have to set up an artistic profile to be able to submit the portfolio or the auditions that you've recorded, things of that nature. So sometimes you need to submit your application a bit before to trigger that artistic kind of next steps to have everything in by the actual deadline. On October 8th, we have our financial aid program. So like I said, college money method. So it's a great just kind of general overview of financial aid, understanding financial aid, how to apply for it, things of that nature. And then October 24th, ideally, we need a final draft of everything so that your counselor has 1 week to review everything with you, give you final feedback. You can do final edits. So that way everything is ready to go and to be submitted on October 30th or October 31st for early decision and early action, which is 1 or 2 days before the deadline because the Common App gets very glitchy on November 1st. So we're aiming to apply early to avoid the glitches. Last year, we had a lot of students that were applying on November 1st and the website kept crashing and they were like freaking out. So we don't want to be in that situation. We want to alleviate anxiety. So we're a day or two before, you'll be golden. So that's October. October, I will say, is very, if you don't plan ahead, it can be a lot. So our biggest piece of advice is get started now, get ahead. I recommend if it's with your early schools, take 1 or 2 schools a week, do those supplements, submit them to your counselor, continue with the next schools while your counselor is reviewing those, and you'll go back and forth until everything is finalized. For November, that's the actual deadline. So you'll apply EDEA. Typically, that's November 1st or 15th. From there, you'll consult with your counselor in October and November. So for early and for regular, you should be sitting down and going through your list. And if you have testing, figuring out like, is my testing competitive for schools and which one should I submit testing to and which one should I withhold it from? So that's important to do in October for your early schools, but as well as in November for your regular decision schools. As soon as you apply early, Ms. Middleton said this already, but take like a day or 2 off and then continue with the rest of your applications because all of your applications need to be drafted and completed and ready to submit by the time that you leave for winter break. Because there are a lot of scenarios that can work out. You can apply early decision and you can get in and great, you're done. You did all this extra work, but at least you got into your June school. You can apply early decision and you get deferred. So you still have to submit the rest of your applications, even though you're still being considered for the original ED school that you applied for. Or you can apply early decision and get denied, and then you have to submit the rest of your applications. So we want to put you in the best case scenario where like if anything happens, you're ready to go. And that requires everything being done before you leave for winter break. If you don't do everything before winter break, you're going to be working over winter break. And I think you all know that by December, students are tired and you all deserve a rest. And we all deserve a rest because we work a lot, right? And then we all get to rest if everybody does what they need to do. So we highly recommend prioritizing that everything gets done. You want to continue with portfolio auditions and interview planning, especially for regular decision schools. And then November is important because while you're doing all this, you also want to maintain your grades and make sure that they're strong. Because if you apply early decision or early action, we will send your first quarter grades to that school. And colleges like to see a really strong first quarter. If you've been a strong student throughout high school and you have strong first quarter, you're keeping that consistency. If you've been a student that's been on an upward trend, they want to see that trend continuing with strong first quarter. They don't want to see the opposite. So that's just really important. First quarter grades do matter, and you want to make sure that you're starting off strong, especially because for a lot of you, this is the most rigorous schedule that you have that they can see evidence of success. In December, basically your final college list is due. So there might be some last minute kind of adjustments that you're making to your list that you would add and complete the supplements. All your supplements ideally would need to be drafted, and any final schools that you've added, you would need to draft those as well too. And then you start hearing back from different colleges and universities. So you might hear back from Early Decision by early to mid December. Some early action schools will come back as early to mid December, sometimes as late January. But you'll start receiving news back, and it's going to be mixed news. That's just how it is every year. There's going to be good news, there's going to be bad news, there's going to be some you're still in the run-in for admission, but it's going to be a longer process. So like I said, it's always great to be prepared and to take the steps to be prepared. By 12:15, all applications should be ready to submit. When you hear back from your ED school, if it's good, you don't have to submit any other applications. You don't have any other extra steps. You just commit to your school. If it's not, then you would start submitting the rest of your applications. And then finally, in late January, when all your semester grades are available for any other schools that you've applied to, whether it's ED, a deferral, or all your regular decision schools, we will send your semester grades to those colleges as well too. So it's also important to keep that trajectory and to keep that strong profile going throughout senior year. So this is the ideal situation that we want all of you to be in. If you don't follow this, it will get stressful. I would say a rule of thumb that we want you all to follow is that if you are drafting something, at the very least, in terms of timing, you should give your counselor 1 week from the deadline for us to review things, to give you quality feedback and send it back to you. Sometimes I know that you're all up at like 3 in the morning because I see you in your Google Docs, or we'll get an email at like 4 in the morning. We don't do that. So we like our beauty sleep. So if it's 2 days before the deadline and you send me something at like 5 in the morning, I'm probably not going to respond to that. If it's the day before the deadline, to be realistic, you're probably not going to get feedback on that. And you want to put your best foot forward and submit something that you're confident in, and that takes collaboration and timing so that you're receiving proper feedback, you're strengthening your application to the best of your ability, and that you're submitting something that you're confident in. The final thing is, this is the overarching thing, and parents, we know that you're having conversations with your students. Your students might be telling you a lot, your students might be telling you a little. You might be hands off and wanting to know how they're doing. You might want to discuss like the strategy that they're thinking of. We welcome you all to schedule a meeting with us. Ideally, we prefer to meet with parents for the first 2 weeks of October, because the last 2 weeks of October are very busy because we're meeting with students. We're going home and reviewing supplements. We are doing logistical things at our office. So it gets very, very busy for us. So it's not the best time for us to sit down and have a conversation about strategies that are about to happen in like a week or a couple of days. So we highly recommend that if we have those conversations, that we start now up until the first 2 weeks of October. Awesome. I'm going to write Ms. Chen up to talk about some other exciting things, and I'll be back shortly.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. So we talked a little bit about best practices, but we wanted to reiterate some really good practice and habits to have to be successful in this process. So check your calendar, your Google Calendar. I know you can't do it on your phones anymore in school, so use your laptop. Check your emails. Please, please check your emails. We send out important reminders. And if you aren't looking at the class of 2026 College Counseling Google Classroom, please do so, because we're also going to put updates there. So updates and reminders will be in so many different places. So hopefully you won't miss it. But the document that you all received as well has some really important deadlines and reminders, as well as the document that was received during Reboot Camp. Seniors, you have that in that folder. So please make sure that you are monitoring that. As Mr. Almonte said, writing should be submitted to your counselor at least 1 week, but preferably 2, especially during busy times, because that would really allow us to dive deep and give you the best feedback possible. Again, if it's 1 week, that's okay. But as Mr. Almonte said, if you're sending it to us 1 hour before midnight on November 1st, best of luck to everyone involved, but we probably won't be able to get that to you. So you want to make sure that you're utilizing your time wisely. Avoid stress for you, avoid stress for parents and families, avoid stress in general. Keep up the momentum. Ms. Middleton mentioned this. So it's not about getting everything done at once. It's about spreading the love a little bit. So really prioritizing and focusing on early action, early decision right now. If you have a deadline in January 20th, you do not need to be thinking about that right now. That is November and December thoughts. So start to roll that out. But after you apply early, don't just stop thinking about college. Even if you're like early decision, I'm locked in, we hope that it all comes out and works well for you. But we think it's also good karma and the energy to put the effort into your regular decision applications. Make sure that you're getting everything done. Maybe it means you did more work and you don't need to submit those applications. But the last thing that you want to do if you don't hear great news in early decision is start working on applications. So you want to keep the momentum going, the energy rolling. But right now, focus and priority should be early action, early decision applications. Also, Ms. Middleton mentioned a little bit about utilizing additional resources and outside support. We understand that for some students and some families, it could be helpful to have additional eyes on your essays or additional guidance in this process. So if you are utilizing external essay writing coaches or external college counselors, we understand, but we want you all to think of these tools as support, that they should not overtake the process, and especially making sure that the student's voice is at the center of this. It really, really matters when it comes to the essay piece in particular. The students probably saw this when we were doing case studies, but the essay and the supplements, that's the one time that a student's voice comes through in the application. And we want to make sure that it is prioritizing the student. So when we're thinking about artificial intelligence, and I know students have been hearing a lot about this in their classes throughout the first couple of days, the role of artificial intelligence in their classroom, it's going to be a pretty similar policy in college admissions as well. It can be a helpful tool to start organizing thoughts, to do some initial research, but it should not be generating information that you are then replicating in your writing. It should not be generating your writing, period. Colleges want to hear from you, and you might actually start to see colleges asking students to sign statements in their application stating that I did not use generative AI in my writing piece. They are thinking about it just like we all are thinking about it. And so our expectation is that you are utilizing these supports as supports, but they are not dominating this process. We've all read applications before, thousands of them. We can always tell when an essay is written by a 30-year-old with a master's in English. We want to hear from a 16, 17-year-old. That's the best part of reading the applications, or it was for me, was actually hearing from you all. So don't second guess your voice. We're here to help. You might have those additional supports, but we want you to be at the center of this process, okay? So a couple of quick things just talking about the state of higher education. I feel like every other day I get a news alert about what's happening in higher ed. So we wanted to talk about two things in particular that is often on the forefront of conversations: standardized testing and what is happening post the SCOTUS decision on race-conscious admissions. So standardized testing, I know it might start to sound like everyone is returning back to requiring testing, but that's not the case. It really is a very few selective institutions that, to be quite frank, prior to 2020, love testing anyway. So you might see it with the Ivies, Caltech, MIT, Johns Hopkins, a couple of the public school systems, but over 20,000, or excuse me, 2,000 schools are still test optional. 75 and more are test free, including the University of California system, meaning they will not accept any testing in making their admissions decision. So a majority of the colleges and universities out there are giving students the choice to decide whether or not to submit testing, and which has been already discussed. Meet with your college counselor to decide what's going to be the best method for you. For some schools, it might be, I'm going to submit testing, but the other schools I'm not going to, or I'm completely going test optional. Every single year, we've had students who have not submitted any testing to schools and have gotten various offers at the end of the process. So I know it can sometimes feel a little bit convoluted, and actually that the colleges are putting more work on you because now you have to decide, what do I do with testing? What do I not do with testing? But that's why we're here. And we do want to assure you that if they are test optional, it truly means test optional. At this point, if the schools really like testing, they're going back to requiring testing. And testing, while an important part, is not the only factor in an admissions decision. It never was. It's something that they're utilizing, but it's not the make or break. Something else that's going on in higher education and continuing to be a large discussion is the effects of the Supreme Court decision, and I want to say 2023, about race conscious admission. So the Supreme Court ruled that race cannot be a factor utilized in the admissions decision. That is part of this kind of affirmative action, race conscious framework that many people might be familiar with. But just to assure you, as someone who's worked in admissions for 6 years prior to joining here, we have like 50 years total in experience in admissions. Race was never the sole factor in determining a decision. It was one of many factors that colleges would take into consideration to make a diverse, informed, passionate, dedicated, academically strong and rigorous class. Students can still share their information about the experiences that their race or ethnicity has had on them in other parts of the application. It just won't be a data point that colleges will be able to see. So we want to assure students that if your race and ethnicity has been an important part of your identity, that you should still feel empowered to speak about that story. And your college admissions counselors are here to help you be able to discuss that, whether that's in affinities, groups that you talk about in your extracurricular, whether that's in your personal essay or in, excuse me, your supplemental essays. So there's still a lot of ways to be able to tell that story. Colleges are also starting to see some changes, to be quite honest, and it hasn't been consistent. It has been quite varied across the different universities, seeing increases or decreases in demographics. And so you might not see the most up-to-date information when you're going and visiting colleges of what that demographic looks like, because colleges are also having to wait longer in order to access that information. So most colleges will be able to see that data in October, and they'll be able to start sharing what the demographic breakdown of their campus is. If that's something that's important to you in looking for campuses, you should feel empowered to ask the admissions counselors when they come and visit Berkeley Carroll, or when you go and visit the colleges, to learn a little bit more of what their college looks like. You might also start to see a question around community if you're starting to organize that supplement list that Mr. Almonte mentioned. And we've seen a larger increase in that since the SCOTUS decision. This is an opportunity for colleges and universities to learn about the communities you've come from. Again, that could be race or ethnicity, but it can apply to all students to talk about the communities that have shaped you. Maybe it's a religious community. Maybe it's where you grew up. Maybe it's part of a sport or a hobby or a passion. We showed a few examples of that in the writing workshops this summer with students, so they might be familiar. But if you come across those community questions, really think about how you can talk about the varied communities that have helped shaped you and helped you evolve into who you are and who you want to be, because colleges are looking for that. So I'm actually going to bring Mr. Almonte back up to talk a little bit about some terminology. Right?
So we've talked about this before multiple times, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. So I want to talk about the difference between the different types of deadlines that you're probably all deciding where to apply to. So I always like to kind of compare this to like dating. So early decision 1 and early decision 2 are like, you're very serious, right? You have met the person of your dreams, the college of your dreams, and you are like, this is it. I don't want anybody else. I want you. I'm proposing to you. I want you to marry me. And then on the receiving end, the college is like, wow, out of all the colleges out there, they picked us. Like they proposed to us. That's a serious thing. This is the highest form of demonstrated interest that they could have given us, right? That's something serious that they like to see, right? But, you know, you have to obviously be academically competitive, admissible, things of that nature. So ED is a binding commitment. It is the highest form of demonstrated interest that you can give an institution. And you're saying, I'm applying to you and I'm taking this shot on you and I am proposing to you. And if you admit me, I will come to your school. You are guaranteed to get me. So colleges like that because it's a very easy way for them to fill their class instead of going out with an offer on a student and it's a gamble if they're going to get them or not. Colleges like to secure their class because then the institution can run as normal and the institution is good standing. The difference between early decision 1 and early decision 2, they're basically the same thing. It's just one's a little earlier than the other. Some students need a little bit more time to figure that out. Some students are still kind of weighing out decisions. I would say early decision one maybe has like a slight advantage because you're the first round of applicants seen at all for the year, and then ED2 and regular, you can always compare to what you've seen. But typically, when you apply ED, the acceptance rate for the amount of people applying and who's been admitted between ED1 and ED2 at most schools is usually the same. If you apply ED1 to a school and you're admitted, you're contractually bound to go. If you are deferred or denied, you can reroute an ED2 to another school. So you have two really good shots that you can take that are pretty big game changers. ED1 and ED2, I would say most schools are taking about half their class, between maybe 50 to 60% of their class, in ED1 and ED2. So it increases the likelihood of admission. There are a lot of students that apply ED1 or ED2 somewhere and it works out. But if they would have waited until regular decision, it might not have been the same decision. So it's a very big commitment that you're making, but can be a really big payoff in the long run. Early action is like, we're dating, you're cool, I like you, I'm investing my time in you, but I'm not like proposing to you yet, we're not in a relationship, but you know, I'm gonna express some interest. So early action is a priority deadline. You're showing them you're kind of serious, but you're not taking any big commitments. You submit your application, you find out early, but you're not bound to anything that you don't want to do. You can decide if you want to attend that institution later. You can decide if you want to kind of make that commitment later. Single choice early action and restrictive early action is I would like to say dating, but a little bit more exclusive. So you're basically saying, I'm going to express interest in you. I'm going to apply to your school, but because I'm applying single choice or restrictive early action, I am not going to apply early decision or early action to any other private institution. So it limits you in terms of what's on the table of how many applications you can send out. This isn't a very common thing. You see it at like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, but not many schools have restrictive early action. In this case, what we typically advise is if you're doing restrictive early action or single choice early action, to apply to a public that you really like, because that's still fair game and on the table. And then regular decisions, just like I like you, not a lot of commitment, you know, you're on my list, you're on my radar, I'm just gonna submit an application and then I'll figure things out later. So how does one decide? So in a perfect world, right, we would love if every student applied ED, right? Because that increases the likelihood of students getting admitted, especially to more selective schools. But the reality is your ED school might not be your reach. It might be a middle or a foundation. It's your favorite school, it's your top school, it's a school that you see yourself happiest at. And that's not always a reach. I think there's this misconception a lot that like your ED has to be the most selective school on your list. That's not true. It should be the place that you're happiest at, that you want to take the biggest shot on. We also understand that, you know, things with financial aid, and sometimes it's just really hard to make a decision. So not every student will apply ED. Every year we have students that don't do ED. In that case, we would say that your foundations in your college list and your middles should be pretty strong, because things will get harder for most schools, if not every school, by regular decision. But it should be your clear first choice. And then in terms of finances, if you're applying for financial aid, you should use a net price calculator and do some research with the school to get an estimate of what it is that you're going to receive as a financial aid package. And if it's financially feasible, it makes sense to apply early decision to that school. Schools are also really lenient. Like if you apply to the school and you get your financial aid package and it's like ruining your life with like crazy amounts of debt that are like the amount of like 2 houses in a Maserati, obviously, like you can be like, this is not gonna work, and they'll release you from that ED contract. However, that's where your application is voided for the year and you can't get that decision back. So it's a big commitment. It's a big financial commitment. If you're applying for financial aid, ED will not allow you to see any other decision, because you're withdrawing your applications from any other school that's active and you're committing to that school. So you won't know what happened with admissions decisions to any other schools. You won't know if you got a scholarship for another school. You won't know what your financial aid package was for another school. What do the statistics tell us is that schools like ED, admission is more likely in ED1 and ED2. A lot of times ED, like I said, can be the game changer. The advantage is that you're making that big commitment. A lot of times there's more wiggle room in terms of admission. There might be more wiggle room in terms of testing. There might be more wiggle room in terms of just admission criteria in general. So it really is kind of like a big game changer that we would highly consider if it's something that's feasible for you and your family to definitely discuss. In terms of ED, we always like to say ED is like a stepping stool. It's not a ladder, right? So a lot of times we're very data driven in this office, and we also understand that data can't tell us everything. But we also have a lot of anecdotal information surrounding that data that we understand why some decisions might have happened. So, when you're looking at data, sometimes there's, say, hypothetically, there's a student that's like a 3.4, and you can see in the data for regular decision that students are getting admitted around a 3.6. An ED might be able to push that 3.4 to that admit range, right? But if a student's like a 3.4 and the school's admitting students in a regular decision around a 3.9, that's a ladder. Like that's really far. And that ED might not be the biggest push to be able to make that admission a reality. So it's really understanding like how to strategize your ED, and if you're going to take a big gamble, having a college list that can withhold if it doesn't work out in your favor. Sometimes it does, it's very rare, but sometimes it does. But if it doesn't, that your college list has options that you would still be happy with, and then maybe considering like what you're gonna do for ED2 in terms of taking another shot if you decide to do that. But I would like to say there's a strategic ED and then there's a gamble ED, and sometimes that can really dictate the rest of the process moving forward. So it's important that you feel confident in what you're doing. We will support whatever it is that you want to do, but our job is to make sure that you have options at the end of this process and that your list is strong and that you have options that you're happy with at the end of this process. But sometimes those are reaches, sometimes they're middles and foundations. But all of you will have options at the end of this process. In terms of your final list of colleges, so we always say like, what's the magic number? So this year, the magic number is 13. So for the class of 2025, the average number of applications was 13. We always like to say what's manageable, what's a good balance list where you'll have options and you won't be really stressed is, I would say, 10 to 12. That's not an end all be all. Like we cannot tell you how many schools to apply to. Some people like to cast a wide net, but I will say like a really strong list where you can cast a wider net is where you have a strong foundation and a healthy middle. Applying to 12 reaches does not make sense because you probably will have little to no options if that's the case that you do. But if you have a strong foundation in the middle, you can take some gambles if you're looking for something more selective or if your top school is a selective institution. Everybody's process is different. So going back to the apples and oranges kind of analogy and metaphor is some students will apply to one school and they don't hear back from any others and they got into their ED school. Some will apply to 6, some will apply to 13, 15, sometimes we have 20. The Common App only lets you apply to 20 schools and then you're capped out. And then if you do want to do anything beyond that, you have to create a whole nother application called the Coalition and it gets crazy and I don't think that's worth it. In terms of your list and apples and oranges, like everybody's deadlines are going to be different. So there's some people with November 1st deadlines that might be applying to early decision and early action schools. You might have 8 applications that are going out the door. And then there might be another student that doesn't have any early action schools and only an ED application is going out the door November 1st. So it is going to get very different. We highly recommend ED and EA. Any school that has EA, your counselor is going to tell you to complete the application by the EA deadline. EA is awesome if you do an EAD and an EA because if you get an ED, great. If you don't get an ED, but you start hearing some good news from your EA schools, a lot of times that alleviates the stress and anxiety. And then if you get into an EA school that's really high on your list, you can drop off the rest of your list and then do whatever you want beyond that because you've secured a school that you'd be happy going at, and then you can kind of reach farther. So we highly recommend considering ED, but definitely any schools that offer EA, you want to prioritize those and make sure that you get them done by the deadline. Ms. Chan's going to come back up and talk about more fun things.
All right, so I'm going to do a speed run through some of the resources that you might already be available or aware of, and if not, you should be. SCORE. Seniors should know this very well by now, and if not, you will become familiar. This is where you are going to put the schools you are applying, and it is essential that you use it because this is also the method through which we send your transcripts and letters of recommendation. So, seniors, you will start moving, if you have not already, the schools that you will be applying to in the applying column in SCORE. Once you have applied, you will move it to the applied column. That will be helpful for us, because then we will know to send out those materials. We will not know to send things if it is not in that applied. So if you decide to go rogue over winter break and you're like, I'm going to apply to 7 more schools, you need to make sure that you put that in SCORE so we can make sure that they get the materials in on time. SCORE is also where you will be able to see all of the 90+ colleges that will be visiting us and how you can register to visit those schools. It is very important that you ask for permission to visit the schools. It is not a demand. It is not a guarantee that your teachers will give you permission. You might have exams. They might have important topics that they want to cover. Ask if you could go for that first 5 minutes, as Ms. Middleton said. If you cannot attend, let us know. We will attend on your behalf, especially if that school tracks demonstrated interest. We'll mark the cards and make sure that they know you're very much interested in attending. And you need to ask that permission 2 working days in advance. So, kind of a quick math question. If a visit's on Monday, what day do you need to ask? Okay. You know what? It's all 8 o'clock. I'm allowing that to work. I would say Thursday. Thursday, you need to ask 2 working days in advance. Thursday. So please ask those teachers early if you need to attend. And again, it is an ask, a request, not a demand. Getting organized. We talked a lot about that today. Making sure that you are organized in this process will make this process enjoyable. It's an enjoyable step. You're getting ready to go off to college. So there are a couple resources available back in SCORE. There's a student drive. Ms. Middleton added a lot of materials into that drive, and we will continue to do so. So for example, the college research organization spreadsheet that was actually sent out to you, I think in June of your junior year, and it's now in the drive. You can use that as a template to start getting yourself organized. When are visits for BC? Is there a supplement? Will you be submitting testing? Will you not? Especially if you're applying to more than 2 colleges, which on average you should be, you're going to want to get organized. So that's a really helpful tool. Part of getting organized is also doing that research around when are you visiting those campuses? When are you scheduling interviews? If that's a part of your process, might not be for everyone else. Are there virtual programs that are available? So this is a screenshot of a school that has all 3. Start to do that digging if you have not already, and start to schedule that earlier rather than later. There are some deadlines for interviews if that is a part of your process. You do not want to miss out on an opportunity to share a little bit more about yourself. And then organizing a Google Doc. That is so important for the writing piece. So maybe you put it all in one Google Doc and you use the fancy tab section and you have a different tab for every school. Great. But what you want to include is the deadline, the word count, the question. That is going to help organize you. And it's also going to be helpful for whoever is reviewing your essay or supplements to make sure you're in the word count, make sure you're answering the question, make sure you're doing the best that you can in that writing piece. So have at least one document, I would say. If you want to work off of multiple, fine, but I think one document makes it a little bit easier through the process. And then lastly, the BC College Counseling Resource page. That is in the signature of, I believe, all of our emails, but is a really, really helpful resource page with some great information. I think this is a link that I will do very, very quickly. You can schedule time to meet with us. You can also see information about the process, but this is a fun section. Does my college consider demonstrated interest? Does it consider legacy? Are interviews a part of it? What's the ED and RD rate? All of this in one very, very helpful place. So if you have a question, we're always here to answer it, but the BC College resource page, and I'm sure we'll send out another link to it, but it is in the signature of our emails. Really, really great place. And now back to the slides. All right.
Okay, I want to make sure that this video captures a little bit about what we're talking about here. Hopefully that did it. I want to talk just for a couple of minutes about need-based financial aid. We have a whole night that is devoted to this, and actually to a little bit about merit aid as well. So if you plan to apply for financial aid, mark your calendars with that October 8th date. College Money Method, who we've contracted with for a number of years, they do 6 different workshops over 9th grade through 12th grade. This workshop is focused specifically on the 12th grade process. They walk through so many different parts of the application process, including these 2 forms that you see above. So colleges, when you're applying for financial aid, they all require the free application for federal student aid that opens on October 1. Typical deadlines are around the same time as your application deadlines for admission. And then the CSS profile is required by most private colleges, though not all. And that's the form that asks for a little bit more information about assets. It looks at things like home equity, for example. So both of those forms are required by some schools. They use prior tax year information. The FAFSA form will calculate that student aid index. And then colleges are figuring out financial aid packaging based upon the responses from these forms, either using institutional methodology or federal methodology. College Money Method is a godsend, I would say. They really walk through all of this information. If you haven't visited their site, and I'll open that in a second too, so that you can see the richness of the resources available there. If you haven't looked at their site, chock full of information, even step by step of these forms and how to fill them out. Paul does an amazing job of doing some of his pre-recorded sessions. This session is going to be live, though it's going to be virtual, so we don't all have to be in the same place to listen to it or to watch it. He always posts it the next time or the next day in the College Money Method site, which is linked to that resource page that Ms. Chen just showed you. Before I open that College Money Method site to show you the other resources that you see below, the net price calculator, we'll make sure that you have this link to this site, but this particular site, the collegecosts.ed.gov, that will allow you to do net price calculators for any of your schools. So you can plug in the name of the school, it pulls up that particular college or university's net price calculator. You plug in your information and it'll give you a pretty good pre-read of what your financial aid package might look like. The more complex your taxes are, or the more complex your financial information is, the less accurate it can be. So sometimes it's great to have that net price calculator in hand to use when talking to the folks in the financial aid office. And they can really help you walk through things like, how do you use home equity? Are my credit card bills going to be counted as part of my debt? Those kinds of things that are kind of complex and a little bit different than what just everybody might be asking. Financial aid officers are also a great resource for. And again, I hope this works. Jumping into the site itself, this is only for this first program that we're doing with College Money Method. They have a registration link so they can capture all your information, and Paul can follow up with information. And then the recording and resources, this is last year's recording, but he posts that literally the next day, shows you those CSS profile and FAFSA live programs that he does, and then more planning resources than probably anybody ever wanted to know were there. But he's pretty efficient. Also, again, a great resource if you've got individual questions as you're going through filling out this application. He can help to answer those and does some one-on-one meetings as well. So hopefully I do this right and get us back to where we were. Am I doing this right, Joelle, right? There we go. Technology is wonderful until I forget what I'm doing. The other thing I wanted to talk about before we jump into, I think probably our last slide for the evening, is just to talk a little bit about merit scholarships. If folks are looking for the opportunities for merit scholarships, one of the general rules to think about is those schools that are a little bit less selective will often use merit funding, and they call it tuition discounting, but they'll use merit funding to draw students to their campus. So every year we'll have a student who comes in or a parent who comes in and says, oh my gosh, got the acceptance letter in the mail, and surprise, there was a $10,000 a year scholarship. This is what colleges will do to bring families like yours, bring smart students like you to their campuses. So there might be some that you see arrive in your inbox, or you see arrive with that financial aid, or arrive with that offer of admission, that are unexpected, extraordinarily welcome, and very exciting to see. And they call that tuition discounting. Those colleges that are highly selective, so if we're talking about places that are, generally in that less than 20%, less than 50%, certainly less than 5% range, they typically have need-based aid. So if they have application-based scholarships, they're usually pretty highly selective, and they usually require an extra application. Sometimes it's something that they notify you about through the common application, but it does require a little bit of research on your end to learn more about those scholarships. Again, certainly we can help you understand that, help you find the information. The other thing that Paul posts, and we actually also have in our resource page, is a spreadsheet that has information about both the percentage and the dollar amount, the average dollar amount of merit scholarships offered. So you can open up this spreadsheet and see, by those percentages and by those total amounts, what colleges on average were offering to the prior year's applications. It's really an interesting tool. And again, you can then do your research from there. Athletic scholarships as another route where folks are receiving scholarships. It all depends upon the division, the sport, and certainly position dependent as well. So some universities will have a lot of funding for a particular sport and for particular students, particular athletes that they're really interested in. But generally, when we're talking about schools that offer athletic scholarships, it's Division I non-Ivy League schools or Division II schools. And then the third kind of resource for scholarships are outside scholarships. It could be the Rotary Club, it could be a national organization that's offering that. And on our resource page, you'll find a whole bunch of different links to programs like FastWeb, the College Board Scholarship Service. Going Merry is another one that I think we have 6 students signed up for right now. I usually invite all the students who are receiving financial aid from Berkeley Carroll to be part of that site. And I'll send out another grouping probably sometime this week to all those students as well. But if you're interested in getting on that site, the Going Merry site, I'm happy to add you to it. But check our resource page for some of these particular resources on scholarship funding. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Almonte, who's going to talk about after the application submission.
So last 2 slides, and I'll be very quick because I know this has been a long program. So before you get your decisions, what's really important is that you update your applied list and score. So right now, most of your colleges in score should be in applying. You're just gonna slide them over in the future to applied, and then that triggers an email to our office to send your documents to that school. If your school is not in the applied column in the future, we don't know you applied there. We don't send your documents, your application is incomplete. If it's incomplete for too long, you get automatically denied. So it's important that you do that in the future because that ensures that your application will get complete. Once you apply, every school that you apply to is going to email you and say, hey, X, Y, and Z, thank you so much for applying to our school. Follow this link to create your applicant portal. So you're going to create an applicant portal for every single school that you apply to. And that applicant portal allows you to see the status of your application, what documents have been received. If your application is complete, you can sometimes report testing on there. Sometimes you can request an interview. And then ultimately, when you get your admissions decision, it's going to be in that portal for that respective school. Your job is to monitor those applicant portals, because if anything is missing because technology is not perfect, we would have to resend your documents. So every year, sometimes we have to send a transcript again, we have to send a recommendation again. If your application is missing something, like I said, it'll be incomplete, and an incomplete application for too long will eventually get denied. They give you wiggle room, and there's like window periods where you can still get things in, but you have to be hyper vigilant about checking those portals and making sure that your application is complete. And then once it's complete, you let it go. And then eventually the school will email you to let you know, hey, we're releasing decisions at this date and this time. And then you log into the portal to get your decision. Some schools, it's really annoying, but some schools have this thing. It used to be called the SRAR. Now it's called the STAR. Typically, this is larger public institutions. Once you apply, you'll get an email to complete your STAR, and basically that's a self-reported academic record. You basically have to go in and plug in your transcript into a system and then submit it to the school. If you don't do that, again, your application is incomplete. If it's incomplete for too long, it can get automatically denied. So those are the things that you have to be hyper vigilant about before you apply. We'll talk about these things again in the future. After you apply, if you're admitted, you want to confirm your enrollment, right? Because you want to say like, hey, I got admitted, but you have to claim your spot. And if it's an ED school, you have to withdraw all your other applications because that's the agreement. And then just in general, if you get into a school and maybe it's not ED, it's RD, and you know you're going to commit to that school, withdrawing those other applications frees up another spot for a student at Berkeley Carroll in the larger applicant pool, or maybe students that are on the wait list. So we want to, go in this process with like grace and dignity and integrity and help people out, because you withdrawing your application, it just changes the numbers, and then they can make an offer for somebody else who might be really excited or that might be their top choice school. If you get deferred, this is a really hard one. So if you ED somewhere and you get deferred, that's probably like the hardest decision I think a student has to make, because then you have to decide, are you going to write out the defer to see what happens with that original ED school? Or are you going to reroute and apply ED2 to another school and try to secure that school in ED2? So it's important to consult with your counselor when that happens, or if that happens, because then at that point we can figure out, like, anecdotally, if we have data that might have, might have worked with students where that might have happened, and we can try to guesstimate like what might be the outcome, or if it makes sense to write out the deferral, or if it would make sense to reroute in ED2. But ultimately that decision's up to you. If you get a waitlist offer, a lot of times you have to respond to that waitlist offer and opt into the waitlist. And sometimes you might have to submit a short statement of what your waitlist offer. Or if you get deferred or waitlisted, you have to craft a letter that says, I'm still really interested in your school, and these are the updates that have happened since I applied that I want to update you on. So those are next steps that you might have to take in the future. If you're in the regular decision pool, you're going to get a lot of news, and those good news is those places that have admitted you, they're going to have these events called admitted student events, where they're basically inviting you to campus. They're rolling out the red carpet. There's glitz, there's glamour. It's amazing. The campus is on steroids, and you love it, right? Because they want to try to sway you to come to the school. So if you're figuring out like, these are all my offers, I want to figure out where to go, attending those admitted students events will help you. For families that are on financial aid, at that point, you would have all your financial aid packages by the end of regular decision, and you can start comparing and contrasting packages. And if affordability is really important to you, you can make an informed decision based on offers and then how much money is on the table for each school. And then the final thing you're going to do is celebrate. And then finally, support, in terms of support. So we also understand that this is not an art. It's an art, not a science. And we don't have a crystal ball. We make informed decisions collectively. We help you out because we're basically looking at your list. At some point, myself, Ms. Middleton, and Ms. Chen, we will audit all your college lists to see if there's any imbalances. So we work very collectively to try to set you up for success. But the reality is there's no recipe that you can get it exactly right and guarantee an admit to each school, because things change from year to year. The applicant pool changes, the priorities for the institution changes, the testing profile changes, right? The only thing that you have control over is your application and working with your counselor and support system to submit something that you are absolutely confident in, that reflects who you are as a person. And then we cross our fingers and we hope for the best, and we come up with a really good strategy that we are maximizing your opportunities, hoping for success, and getting options at the end of the process. As Ms. Chen mentioned earlier, we are a very well-established office. We have all worked at highly selective institutions. We have over 50 years of collective experience. We're in contact with other college counselors. We're in contact with admissions counselors at all the schools that all of you apply to throughout the years. So we are a well-resourced office that is very capable, and we do this every year, and we get every student across the finish line with options that they're happy with. So it takes this collaborative process, but also a little bit of trust to understand that we're going to try to make this process as easy and smooth for you, and hopefully secure something that you are very ecstatic and excited about. But that's what the options are for, and what your list is for is that every school on your list, you should be happy attending that school. But we're also going to be realistic straight shooters, and we're not going to guide you wrong or kind of like amplify some type of advice. Like we keep it pretty straight up. Ultimately, those final decisions are up to you, but there's a lot of conversations that we have that sometimes are hard, where we're like, hey, that's going to be really tough. That's going to be very unlikely. Let's talk about, if you do take that shot, what that might look like, and creating a plan looking forward. So there are a lot of times where we have very honest conversations, and we do that because we are coming from a place of care and we're coming from a place where we want to ensure success. And then just overall, what we do, we're going to make sure that your list is balanced. We triple check it at some point when we're putting our minds together. We're going to help you with brainstorming essay topics and supplemental ideas. We're going to conduct mock interviews for you. We're going to assist in organizing you, helping you make decisions. Ideally, and every year we look over every single piece of your writing and provide feedback. So we are going to set you up that you are going to have a very strong application. And the final thing that I want to leave you all with is this is a lot, right? We just threw a lot of information at you, but this is going to come in parts, and you have a very big support system at home and here at Berkeley Carroll, where we're going to ensure that we're mitigating stress, that we're getting your personality and your authentic voice in your application, and that we're getting you across the finish line with hopes of aiming for what is your top choice, but also understanding that sometimes it's going to be options that you're also really happy with. But a lot of times students go through this process and it's a transformative experience. So take the time to have grace with yourself and understand that you're also growing as a young adult in this process, and you're making adult decisions. And we understand that it's hard, but it's also a really fun and exciting time in your life. So that is what we have for all of you. It's kind of a very long presentation. We will stay up here, and if you have questions, you can come up to us one-on-one and ask them. But we hope you have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for your patience. And students, schedule meetings. Parents, if you want to meet with us, I would say start between now and the first 2 weeks of October are ideal. Have a wonderful night.
I'm gonna stop this here.
Oh, wait, hang on 1 second, let me just